This happened quite a few years back, around the year 2015, if I remember correctly. My name is Lauren, and the memory of that day has stuck with me ever since. It was a Saturday morning, and I had some errands to run. Back then, I would hop between different stores around town depending on what I needed, but for whatever reason, that morning I decided to stop by my local superstore, a Walmart. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how differently the day might have gone if I'd chosen somewhere else. I pulled into the parking lot and found a space off to the side. The store wasn't as massive back then as they tend to be now. Just one main entrance, a relatively modest lot compared to today's sprawling setups. I wasn't inside long, maybe 10 minutes at most. I can't even recall exactly what I bought. It wasn't groceries, probably just some random household essentials, maybe cleaning supplies or toiletries. Either way, I made my purchase and headed back outside. The lot wasn't busy at all. The weather was decent, cool enough for a jacket, but nothing remarkable. As I approached my car, I noticed another vehicle had pulled in beside mine while I was inside. At first, I didn't give it a second thought. It's a parking lot, after all. But as I got closer, something felt off. There was a man sitting in the driver's seat of the car parked next to mine. The engine was running, and he was just sitting there watching. I climbed into my own car, trying not to overthink it. I reached for my keys, ready to start the engine, when I saw him roll down his window. He waved casually, signaling for me to roll mine down too. I hesitated for a second, but curiosity got the better of me. I cracked my window, just enough to hear what he had to say. The man had sunglasses on, and his hair, bleached blonde and spiked, looked straight out of some early 2000s music video. I couldn't pin his age exactly, but he seemed to be in his late 20s or early 30s. There was something about him that instantly put me on edge. Then he asked me flat out for directions to my house. I blinked, confused at first, thinking it had to be some weird joke. I gave a half-hearted laugh, but deep down, I could feel the warning bells going off in my head. The way he asked wasn't playful. It was unsettling, direct, and way too personal for a stranger in a parking lot. I didn't entertain it for another second. I began rolling my window back up as he continued talking, but I didn't care to hear the rest. I locked my doors and started my car, determined to leave. But as I backed out of my space, I noticed his car moved too, pulling out right behind me. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he just happened to be leaving at the same time. But when I exited the lot and turned onto the main road, I saw in my mirror that he was still behind me, and staying close. The drive home was about 10 minutes. As I weaved through the quieter streets, his car stuck to mine, uncomfortably close, never slowing down or turning off. I kept glancing in my rear view, the uneasiness building with each block. It wasn't a coincidence, I knew that now. I reached my street, and sure enough, he followed. Panic began creeping in. This was before smartphones were common. I didn't have one yet. I didn't know the location of the nearest police station, and I sure wasn't about to lead him to my actual home. Thinking quickly, I looped around the block instead of pulling into my driveway. I circled the street, then headed back toward a main road. My mind raced as I tried to decide what to do, and then it hit me. The Walmart. It wasn't far. It was public. There'd be people, cars, witnesses, safety. Without hesitating, I made my way back toward the store. His car stayed behind me the entire time, glued to my tail. When I reached the parking lot, I wasn't about to park toward the back again. This time, I headed straight for the front, closer to the entrance. It was busier there, though most spots were full. But by some stroke of luck, I spotted an open space near the doors and pulled in. The man couldn't park next to me this time. There were already cars on both sides. Instead, he stopped his car behind mine, awkwardly blocking the driving lane. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I shut off my car, grabbed my keys, and hurried toward the entrance. As I did, I spotted another man, a random shopper, walking toward the doors as well. I quickly approached him and told him I was being followed. I pointed toward the guy in the car, hoping the added witness would deter him. It worked, or at least it rattled him. The man in the car immediately threw it into gear and drove off toward the back of the parking lot. I rushed inside and went straight to the customer service counter. Shaky and breathless, I explained what happened and asked if I could use the phone to call the police. Thankfully, they didn't hesitate. The employee handed me the phone, and I made the call. By the time the officers arrived, the man and his car were gone. I gave them a description of him and the vehicle as best as I could remember, though unfortunately, I hadn't caught the license plate. The police took down all the details and assured me they'd keep an eye out. Eventually I left, rattled but safe. I never saw that man again. But even now, all these years later, I sometimes wonder what might have happened if I'd driven straight home that day, or if I hadn't noticed him sitting there beside my car to begin with. Before we proceed, please let us know where you're from. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel and be a part of our small community. Let's continue. This happened just a few months ago, and honestly, it still gives me chills thinking about it. For some context, I'm a woman in my early 20s, and on this particular night, I made the questionable decision to head to a nearby Walmart pretty late. I can't remember the exact time, but it was well past the busy hours. The parking lot was nearly empty, and when I stepped inside, the place felt almost abandoned, just a few scattered customers and a couple of employees here and there. I only needed a few things, 2 or 3 items at most, so I figured I'd be in and out in no time. After quickly grabbing what I needed, I made my way toward the front of the store to check out. The self-checkout lanes were practically empty, no one in sight except for one employee lingering nearby. As I approached, the employee turned to me and spoke. He told me that all the self-checkouts were down, apparently out of service. He offered to ring me up himself and motioned for me to follow him to another register. At first, it didn't strike me as odd. Machines break down all the time, right? But the more I thought about it, something about the situation didn't sit right. The employee led me down a couple of aisles to a register farther from the others. I couldn't help but notice his appearance as we walked. He was on the shorter side, thin build, with light brown hair that hung down past his shoulders, a little unkempt, and pale, almost tired-looking skin. Trying to keep things casual, I placed my items on the counter as he moved behind the register. He scanned them quickly, making small talk as cashiers often do, asking how my night was going, things like that. I answered politely, eager to pay and head home. But then his questions turned personal. He asked me where I was headed after this. I replied simply, home. Then, with a strange, almost forced smile, he asked if I wanted to hang out with him. I blinked, caught off guard. The way he asked didn't feel like casual friendliness. It made my skin crawl. I declined as politely as I could, saying I had to get home. But he didn't stop there. He suggested grabbing food together or something like that, as he put it. Again I declined, a little firmer this time, making it clear I wasn't interested. His demeanor changed instantly. The fake friendliness vanished. He handed me my receipt with an annoyed, almost aggressive expression. The whole interaction left me feeling uneasy, but I tried to brush it off as awkwardness or bad social skills. Still, as I walked out of the store, I couldn't shake the discomfort. What made matters worse was that they had already locked the set of doors closest to where I had parked my car, so I had to walk all the way around to the far side of the lot. The entire area was eerily quiet, with only a few dim lights flickering overhead. I was about 20 feet away from my car when I heard footsteps behind me, and then a voice. It made my heart stop. I turned to see the same Walmart employee from a minute ago, following me across the lot. It genuinely startled me. I had no idea how he got out of the store so fast, or why he was even out here. He called out, asking me again where I was going. His tone was casual, but his presence was anything but. Without saying a word, I rushed to my car and jumped inside, locking the doors as quickly as I could. My heart was racing, adrenaline flooding my system. Thankfully, he didn't try anything else. No banging on the window, no attempt to open the door. He just stood there for a moment, watching as I fumbled to start the engine. I wasted no time driving off, leaving him and that entire store in my rearview mirror. I haven't been back to that Walmart, or any Walmart, since that night. I still wonder if the self-checkouts were ever really down, or if that was just his excuse to get me away from everyone else. Either way, I have no intention of finding out. And with any luck, I'll never have to see that guy again. A couple of years back, I had a pretty unsettling experience during a late-night trip to Walmart with 2 of my close friends, Mark and Eric. We were all still in high school at the time, probably juniors or seniors, and we'd headed there to grab a few snacks or random things, though I can't remember exactly what we needed. What I do remember clearly, though, was where we ended up inside the store, by the sports card section. Mark was obsessed with baseball cards back then, so naturally, we spent a few minutes there browsing through them. That's when a man approached us. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe around 30. He had a hoodie pulled up over his head, and I could smell the stench of cigarettes coming off him before he even spoke. His whole vibe set off alarms in my head. He asked if we had driven there, and if we could give him a ride. It immediately fell off. I told him no, firmly but politely. He pushed again, saying he didn't need to go far, that it was just a quick ride. But I wasn't budging. Something about the situation screamed trouble. I repeated my answer, and after standing there for an awkward 10 seconds, he finally walked away. We shook it off and wandered to another part of the store, grabbed what we came for, and checked out. But as soon as we stepped outside, there he was again. The man was lingering by the entrance, casually smoking a cigarette, but when he spotted us, his eyes locked onto us like he had been waiting. We tried to ignore him and made a beeline for my car. But he wasn't done. He followed us across the parking lot, walking right alongside us, and again asked for a ride. I told him no again, and quickly unlocked my car. As my friends and I climbed inside, I thought that was the end of it. But to my shock, he opened the back door and climbed into my car like it was the most normal thing in the world. With an unsettling smile, he said, "Looks like now you don't have a choice." My heart started racing. I told him to get out, but his expression didn't change. "I'm not leaving until you take me where I need to go," he replied. Mark and Eric were both tense. I nervously asked him where exactly that was. He just smirked and said, "You'll find out when we get there." It didn't take much imagination to picture all the terrible possibilities, leading us to some secluded spot, getting robbed, or worse. Eric tried to take control of the situation. He threatened to call the police if the man didn't get out of the car. The guy's friendly facade dropped instantly. "If you call the cops, I'll hurt all of you," he muttered, his voice low and threatening. We were just teenagers, and he was a grown man. Even though there were 3 of us, I had no idea what he might be carrying. A weapon, something hidden under that hoodie. Reluctantly, I put the car in gear and started to drive, my palms slick with sweat. But then, like some twist of fate, I saw flashing blue lights. A police car had just pulled into the parking lot. The man swore under his breath, told me to stop the car, and without another word, jumped out and disappeared into the night. To this day, I don't know if he genuinely just wanted a ride, or if he had something much worse planned. But I'm glad I never had to find out. I work stocking shelves at Walmart, mostly overnight shifts. Our store runs 24 hours, so technically customers come and go at all hours, but during those late night shifts, it's usually pretty quiet. Most of my time is spent alone in the aisles, restocking shelves, zoning out to music, and avoiding awkward small talk. But a few weeks ago, I had one of the weirdest and creepiest encounters I've experienced on the job. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was in the cleaning supplies aisle near the back of the store, restocking shelves with hand sanitizer. The store was nearly dead silent, aside from the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep from scanners in the distance. That's when I heard footsteps approaching. I glanced up briefly, catching a figure moving into the aisle from the corner of my eye. No big deal, probably another customer. But as I kept working, I could feel them lingering nearby. The person walked past me at first, but seconds later, they doubled back and tapped me on the shoulder. Startled, I turned to see a man standing way too close for comfort. He looked to be about 25 or so, with a scruffy goatee and long, unkempt hair. His eyes had this unsettling intensity to them. "Can you help me with something?" he asked. Trying to stay professional, I nodded and asked what he needed. For a few painfully long seconds, he just stared, saying nothing. Then finally, he said he needed toothpaste. I pointed down the aisle, giving him directions, but he insisted that I walk with him. Reluctantly, I followed. As we walked, it became clear he already knew where he was going. In fact, he was leading the way. When we arrived at the toothpaste section, my stomach twisted. The shelves were in complete disarray. Toothpaste boxes, toothbrushes, floss, all of it, scattered across the floor like someone had ransacked the place. The man turned to me with this eerie, unsettling grin. Did you do this? I asked, already suspecting the answer. His grin widened. Yeah, he replied casually, like it was some kind of joke, and without another word, he took off sprinting down the aisle toward the exit. I stood there, frozen for a second, processing what just happened. In the end, I was stuck cleaning up the disaster he left behind. Out of all the strange things I've seen working those graveyard shifts, that was by far the weirdest. This is hands down the creepiest experience I ever had during my time working at Walmart. I worked there for almost a year, mostly stocking shelves on the night shift. It wasn't the worst job, quiet, repetitive, but it definitely had its moments. We'd finish our shifts shortly after the store closed for the night, so during those last few hours, the building would be mostly empty except for a mix of overnight stockers like me and a few closing shift employees. In a place as huge as Walmart, even with employees around, parts of the store could feel completely deserted. One night, not long before the end of my shift, I was in one of those quiet aisles, stocking shelves and watching the minutes crawl by. I just wanted to get done and go home. That's when a man approached me. He was wearing a Walmart vest, so I assumed he was new. He greeted me with a simple, "Hey," and I responded the same. The guy introduced himself as Alex and mentioned it was his first week working there. He was on the shorter side, maybe about 5 feet 5 inches, with dark, close-cropped hair and a slim frame. His appearance wasn't threatening, but something about his energy felt off. I asked if he was working the overnight shift too, but he ignored the question, instead saying how much he liked the job so far. Then casually, he asked me what time I was getting off work. I told him I was almost done for the night, expecting the conversation to end there. But Alex smiled and said he was about to clock out too, then asked if I wanted to hang out after. It caught me off guard. I politely declined, explaining that I was exhausted and just wanted to sleep, which was entirely true. He seemed cool with that, smiled again, and said he'd see me around. I gave a quick goodbye, grabbed my cart, and hurried to finish my aisle. As I watched him walk away, I couldn't help but feel a little unsettled by the interaction. But he hadn't done anything explicitly wrong, just odd. After that night, I didn't see Alex around at all. Days passed. Then one evening, I got a friend request from him on Facebook. I hesitated for a moment, but figured it wasn't a huge deal and accepted. After all, we worked at the same place, or so I thought. That's when the messages started. At first, it was innocent enough. "Hey, how's your day?" Small talk. But soon, he was asking to hang out again. I politely declined, saying I was busy. He didn't take the hint. He kept pushing, asking when I would be free. That's when I got more direct, telling him I didn't really know him well, and that I wasn't interested in hanging out at all. He didn't like that answer. The messages kept coming, 4 or 5 of them, all unanswered by me. Eventually they stopped, or so I thought. 2 weeks passed, and still no sign of Alex at work. I figured he either quit or got fired. After all, I'd only ever seen him that one night. But then, out of the blue, another message from him popped up on Facebook. That was the final straw. I blocked him. I had hesitated to do it before, worried it might be awkward if we ran into each other at work. But by this point, I felt sure he didn't actually work there anymore. Still, a lingering curiosity nagged at me. What if he just worked a different department or different hours? The next time I saw my manager, I asked about him. "Hey, do you know a guy named Alex?" Short, dark hair, said he was new. She looked at me blankly. "Alex? I don't think we've hired anyone by that name recently." I asked around a bit more, a few coworkers, the overnight supervisor. Every single person said the same thing. No one named Alex had been hired in the last several months. That realization sent chills down my spine. It hit me that he could have easily just thrown on a Walmart vest and pretended to work there. Those vests aren't hard to get your hands on. You can probably find them online for cheap. I was shaken, but at least I'd blocked him, and with no sign of him around, life went back to normal. Or so I thought. A few days later, I found myself on yet another night shift, stocking shelves in one of the quieter aisles near the back of the store. The building was mostly empty again, just a few employees scattered here and there. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was. Alex, the last person I wanted to see. He walked right up to me and, without missing a beat, demanded to know why I had blocked him. I told him to leave me alone, but he didn't listen. He stepped closer, invading my space, his expression darkening. I glared at him, finally confronting him. "I know you never worked here," I said. He didn't even deny it. Instead, he smiled almost proudly. "Yeah," he admitted. "Got the vest online." Then, suddenly, his fake charm cracked, and he started cursing me out, his voice rising with anger. I tried to back away, but he followed, his footsteps quickening. Real fear settled in. I turned and bolted, racing toward the front of the store, weaving through aisles, my heart pounding in my ears. Up ahead, I saw a few other employees. I tried to head toward them, but they just looked confused, not yet understanding what was happening. Alex was still chasing me. I didn't stop. I kept running until I reached the bathrooms and slipped into the women's restroom, slamming the door behind me. But Alex followed me inside. I darted into a stall, locked the door, and held my breath. Seconds later, I heard him right outside the stall door, lingering, waiting. Then, thankfully, another voice, a man's, came from outside. "Hey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here, creep." Alex's footsteps retreated. He left. I stayed hidden for a few moments longer, waiting until I was sure he was gone. When I finally stepped out, I scanned the area, no sign of him. I immediately found my manager and told her everything. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, Alex had vanished. Over the next few weeks, I never saw him again, but the experience shook me enough that I quit shortly after. I've never heard from him since, and I pray I never do. It was a regular weeknight, nothing special going on. I decided to swing by my local Walmart to grab a few things. Just your typical, uneventful shopping trip. The store was pretty quiet when I got there, probably around 8:30 or 9 p.m. It wasn't completely empty, but there weren't many people wandering the aisles either. I'd been inside for maybe 15 minutes when I found myself in the fitness section, tucked away near the back corner of the store. I wasn't planning on making any big purchases that night, but I stopped when I noticed a display for those massage guns. I'd been considering getting one for a while, so I paused to check it out, reading the box and trying to convince myself I didn't need to spend the money just yet. As I stood there, I could hear voices coming from the next aisle over, the toy section. At first, I paid no attention. One voice was clearly a man's, and the other sounded like a young child. Pretty normal for that part of the store. But then I heard the man say something that made my stomach twist. "I'll buy you this toy if you come with me." I froze for a moment, telling myself it was probably just a dad talking to his kid. But something about the tone didn't sit right with me. It wasn't playful. It was off. I strained to hear more. The child mumbled something in response, too quiet for me to make out, and then the man said, "Your mom said it's okay." That's when my gut told me something was wrong. A dozen things ran through my mind. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was her dad. But what if it wasn't? The man repeated himself, saying, "Come on, let's go," a couple more times. I debated what to do for a second, then curiosity and concern got the better of me. I casually left my aisle and walked over to the toy section, pretending like I was just browsing. As I peeked down the aisle, I saw them, a man in a black jacket and winter hat, holding the hand of a little girl, leading her toward the far end of the aisle. Their backs were turned to me. I didn't have much of a plan, but I acted on instinct. "Excuse me," I called out. The man turned around, his expression surprised and cautious. I quickly grabbed a random toy off the shelf, some kind of stuffed animal, and walked toward them. "Hey, sorry to bother you," I said casually, holding up the toy. "Do you think this would be a good gift for my niece?" The man looked thrown off. I don't know," he mumbled. "Oh, I just thought maybe you'd know," I replied, still walking closer. Then I asked, "Is that your daughter?" His eyes shifted for a second before he answered. "No, I'm just watching her for a minute," he said quickly. "We really need to get going." With that, he grabbed the little girl's hand again and started walking away. Part of me wanted to believe his explanation. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this was a family friend or babysitter. I stood there for a moment, debating with myself, then turned to head in the opposite direction. But not even 30 seconds later, I heard a woman's voice nearby calling out a name. "Emily." Her voice tense, carrying just enough that anyone nearby could hear. I followed the sound and found a woman a few aisles over, looking visibly distressed, scanning the area. I hurried over and asked, "Is Emily your daughter?" Her eyes widened in panic. "Yes. Have you seen her?" That terrible sinking feeling came rushing back. I told her what I had seen, that a man had been leading a little girl toward the front of the store. She didn't hesitate. We both took off running toward the entrance. Luckily, only about a minute had passed since I saw them. When we reached the front, I spotted the man and the little girl at the self-checkout area. He was scanning one of the toys, the little girl standing beside him. The woman, Emily's mother, shouted her daughter's name, her voice cracking with fear and anger. The man immediately started backpedaling, claiming he was just trying to be nice, saying he was buying the toy for her. But no one was buying it. The second he realized the situation wasn't going his way, he bolted, dropped everything and ran straight out of the store. Thankfully, Emily was okay and reunited with her mom. It turned out she had wandered away from her mom while they were shopping, slipping off to look at toys while her mother thought she was nearby. Security was called immediately, and the police were notified. The good news? They managed to track the man down not long after that night. To this day, I still think about what could have happened if I hadn't overheard that conversation, or if I hadn't trusted my gut and said something. Sometimes being a little nosy is the right thing to do. Back when I was 23, I worked at Walmart for nearly 6 months. I've long since left that job, and honestly, I didn't care for it much while I was there. Most days were monotonous, just standing at the register for hours, scanning items and making small talk with strangers. It wasn't the worst job, but it definitely wasn't memorable. At least, not until what I'm about to tell you happened. At the time, I was living alone in a small apartment complex, about a 10-minute drive from the Walmart Supercenter where I worked. It wasn't anything fancy, a pretty average building with multiple floors and lots of units packed together. One particular night still sticks with me. I was scheduled until 9 p.m. that night, working as a cashier at the front of the store. The first few hours were fairly typical, steady foot traffic, nothing out of the ordinary. But after 7 p.m., things started to quiet down. Eventually, it was time for my final break of the shift. I headed to the break room, which was eerily quiet, almost completely empty. I don't recall if anyone else was in there. Maybe 1 or 2 people had come and gone. But for the most part, it felt like I had the room to myself. I was hungry, so I took off my Walmart vest. I had learned the hard way that keeping it on during breaks was a mistake unless you enjoyed random customers asking for directions. I draped the vest over the back of my chair, grabbed my wallet, and went out into the store to grab some food. I paid for it at self-checkout, then headed back to the break room. I sat down, scrolled on my phone, and quietly ate. It was the one peaceful moment of the night, until I realized something was wrong. My Walmart vest was gone. At first, I thought maybe it had slipped off the chair or gotten knocked down, but I looked around, nothing. The vest had vanished, name tag and all. I searched the room, but it was clear, someone had taken it. But who? And why? Confused, I went to find my manager and explained what happened. They brushed it off, told me there were extra vests in a nearby closet, and suggested I grab one. I did, but the whole thing left me with an uneasy feeling. I finished my shift, only about another hour and a half, and headed home with the replacement vest, still wondering what the heck had happened to the original. When I got back to my apartment building, I trudged up to my third-floor unit, ready to forget about the weird night. But the moment I reached my door, I froze. Lying on the floor, right outside my apartment, was my missing Walmart vest. I stood there for a long second, just staring at it, heart racing. I glanced around the hallway, empty. It made no sense. I had never given my address to any co-workers. Sure, I was friendly with a few, but I didn't hang out with them outside of work. The only time I'd seen anyone from work outside Walmart was a group trip to the Applebee's down the street. No one knew where I lived, at least they shouldn't have. I picked up the vest and went inside, locking the door behind me. I couldn't shake the creeping feeling that someone had followed me home. But who? And how? The next day at work, I brought it up to a few co-workers. None of them had a clue what I was talking about. Everyone I spoke to denied being involved. No one admitted to knowing my address. Still rattled, I kept the vest close during my breaks that day, not wanting a repeat of the incident. That night, around 10:30 p.m., I was home again, unwinding, watching TV in my bedroom when I heard a knock at the door. My heart immediately sank. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never had late-night visitors, especially not after what happened the night before. I crept quietly toward the door and looked through the peephole. A man was standing there. He looked rough, thin, with a patchy beard streaked with gray and long, greasy hair. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and faded jeans. His face was unfamiliar, but something about him filled me with dread. Was this the person who took my vest? Who brought it to my door? I backed away from the door as quietly as possible, trying to stay calm. He knocked again, this time louder. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police if he didn't leave. After a long, tense moment, he knocked once more. Then finally, I heard the faint sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway. I cautiously peered outside. He was gone. I debated calling the cops, but there wasn't any real proof of wrongdoing. Maybe it was a neighbor at the wrong door, or maybe it wasn't. But deep down, I knew it was connected to the vest. My instincts screamed that this wasn't a coincidence. The next night, I was back at Walmart, stuck on another evening shift. Everything seemed fine until I noticed him. Across the store, standing about 100 feet away, was the same man, the one from my apartment door. His eyes were locked on me, a twisted smirk creeping across his face. I froze. I forced myself to focus on the customer I was helping, trying to stay calm. But when I glanced back toward him, he was gone, vanished into the crowd. I didn't see him again that shift. I finished work, left quickly, and went home, anxiety gnawing at me the whole drive. Later that night, I fell asleep, but it didn't last long. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a faint, strange sound. It was coming from my front door. At first, I thought I was imagining things, maybe a neighbor in the hallway. But as I listened, the sound became clear. It was music. Faint, like a children's lullaby playing softly right outside my apartment. Terrified, I slipped out of bed, crept to the door of my bedroom, and cracked it open. From there, I could see the front door. The music was definitely coming from the other side. I backed into my room, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. I called the police, barely whispering as I explained what was happening, and gave them my address. It felt like forever, but it was only a few minutes before things escalated. I heard the lock on my front door click, followed by the unmistakable sound of it opening. Panic surged through me. I crouched behind my bed, clutching my phone, barely breathing. Footsteps echoed through my apartment. Whoever it was, they were heading straight for my bedroom. The handle on my bedroom door jiggled, but thankfully the lock held. But then came a new sound, a slow, scraping noise like a saw or blade being dragged across the doorframe. The intruder was trying to break in. I pressed myself farther into the corner, praying the police would arrive in time. The scraping noise continued, steady and deliberate. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard voices outside. "Police! Come out now!" The noise at my door stopped. I heard footsteps retreating, followed by the commotion of officers tackling the intruder. When it was finally safe, I came out of my room and saw them escorting the same man from my apartment. The man from my door, the store, and, as it turned out, the one who had stolen my vest. Apparently, he had been watching me for a while. The police believed he followed me home one night after work, though I never even noticed. I didn't stay at Walmart much longer after that. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I didn't want to stick around to find out what else this man was capable of. To this day, I still lock every door, double-check every window, and I never, ever leave my vest unattended. This happened about 5 years ago now. It's probably the wildest experience I've ever had at a Walmart, and considering how strange that place can get, that's saying a lot. Back then, I shopped at Walmart pretty regularly. It wasn't exactly my favorite place, but it was the most affordable option for groceries and everyday items. Still, the store was always packed, and I'd seen my fair share of odd situations unfold there. One particular evening after work, I made the mistake of stopping by to pick up some groceries. It was around 5:30 p.m., and the parking lot was an absolute nightmare. Cars everywhere, people cutting across lanes, total chaos. As I drove along the back of the lot, someone pulled out from one of the parking aisles without even looking. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid getting sideswiped. Already frustrated, I finally found a spot and parked. But the hassle wasn't over. As I walked toward the entrance, about to cross the main crosswalk in front of the doors, a car blew right past, missing me by barely 5 feet. My heart jumped into my throat. I was inches away from getting hit. Annoyed and rattled, I grabbed a shopping basket and headed inside. I only needed around 10 items, basic groceries. But navigating the store wasn't much easier than the parking lot. The checkout lines stretched halfway down the aisles, and the whole place was packed with people weaving in and out, carts bumping into each other. It was one of those chaotic shopping trips where you immediately regret not staying home. As I made my way to the back of the grocery section to grab a gallon of milk, someone with a cart nearly clipped me coming around a corner. I sighed and tried to shake off the irritation, but things were about to get even weirder. While I was by the far back wall reaching for milk, I heard a small voice behind me. Turning around, I saw a little girl, couldn't have been older than 7, standing beside a fully loaded shopping cart, nearly as tall as she was. She looked up at me and said hi. I smiled politely and said hello back, though I was admittedly confused. Then, completely straight-faced, she asked me if I could pay for all the groceries in her cart, for her and her family. I blinked, taken off guard. I glanced at the cart. It was nearly overflowing with food and other random items, easily well over $100 worth of stuff. "Are those your groceries?" I asked, still processing what was happening. The little girl nodded, but didn't say much else. I explained that I was sorry, but I couldn't help. The only reason I was shopping at Walmart to begin with was to save money. If I had extra cash, trust me, I wouldn't have been there at all. Without another word, she quietly pushed the cart away in another direction. It struck me as strange. The whole thing felt off. Curious, I watched as she headed toward a frozen foods display, where a woman I assumed to be her mother stood. I needed to grab some yogurt nearby, so I ended up walking in their direction. As I got closer, I overheard them talking. The woman, who definitely seemed to be the girl's mother, leaned down and whispered, "Okay, now go to that man over there and ask him." I turned slightly, watching as the girl, struggling a little to push the heavy cart, made her way toward a man browsing near another display. She spoke to him for about 30 seconds before returning to her mom. At that point, I started to piece things together. The woman was sending her daughter around the store, asking random shoppers to pay for their groceries. It made me uncomfortable, but I kept shopping, moving to another section of the store to finish grabbing what I needed. Roughly 15 minutes later, I was near the bakery section, eyeing a few different kinds of bread, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. It was the same little girl. She had approached me again, and once more, asked if I could pay for their groceries. This time, I calmly reminded her that she'd already asked me, and I had said no. Curious, I asked if her mother always made her go around asking strangers for help. The little girl nodded, saying yes. "Why does she do that?" I asked gently. The girl looked uncomfortable but eventually mumbled, "So we can get stuff for free." Before I could respond, the mother stormed over, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. She shoved herself between me and the cart, glaring at me with hostility. "Why are you talking to my daughter?" she snapped. I told her plainly that her daughter had approached me, asking me to pay for their groceries, and I had asked why she was making her do that. The woman was instantly defensive. "That's none of your business," she hissed. I calmly pointed out that people might actually be more willing to help if they didn't have a cart stuffed to the brim with groceries and other random items. Her response caught me completely off guard. "We got a full cart paid for 2 days ago," she bragged, as if that explained everything. I was stunned for a second, then responded, "So, how much stuff do you need? You got 20 kids at home or something?" Clearly fed up, I told her to leave me alone and turned to walk away. That's when she rammed her shopping cart into the back of my legs and lower back. The pain jolted through me, nearly knocking me off balance. I stopped and spun around, furious, as she cursed at me. I yelled at her to stay away, but despite wanting to argue, I decided not to escalate things further. I walked away, leaving her to stew in her anger. But the situation wasn't over yet. A few minutes later, as I browsed another aisle, I suddenly heard a cart barreling toward me at high speed. I turned just in time to see the woman pushing her loaded cart straight at me again. This time I caught it with my hands, but the impact still jarred me and knocked into my legs. She immediately started hurling insults and expletives, trying to ram the cart into me over and over. By now, a crowd had gathered, Walmart employees and other shoppers stepping in to separate us. The woman wouldn't back down. She was completely unhinged. The employees ended up calling the police, who arrived quickly. The woman, in a final attempt to flip the narrative, accused me of attacking her, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Thankfully, multiple witnesses had seen everything. They backed me up, confirming she had rammed me with her cart repeatedly, and I hadn't laid a hand on her. The woman's behavior only worsened when the police tried to intervene. She refused to calm down, cursed at the officers, and eventually, they arrested her right there in the store. As they led her away, I noticed the little girl, who I think was her daughter, leaving with the officers too. I honestly felt bad for her. Hopefully, she had someone else in her life who was more stable than her mother. After that incident, I never stepped foot in another Walmart again, and I definitely don't miss it. When I was 17, I landed my very first job working at a Walmart not too far from where I lived with my parents. It was about a 10 to 15 minute drive from our house, and since I was still in high school at the time, I would usually work in the evenings after classes or on weekends. I didn't have a car of my own back then, so my parents were always the ones driving me to and from work. I was really hoping that after a few months of saving up from this job, I'd finally have enough to buy my own vehicle. A couple of months into working there, I had a shift one evening. It started right after school, around 4 p.m., and I was supposed to be done by 9 o'clock. I worked as a cashier and spent the whole shift up at the front lanes ringing up customers. The night felt pretty normal for the most part. The store wasn't too busy, except for a couple of hours during the early evening rush. After that, it quieted down again. Actually, that night, I got to leave a little earlier than expected. It was about 8:45 when my manager came over and told me I could clock out since it had gotten so slow. I made my way to the back of the store where the employee area was clocked out and sent my mom a quick text to let her know I was done early. She already knew my usual schedule ended around 9, but sometimes I'd finish up a little before or after, depending on how things went. She responded almost immediately, saying she was heading out to come pick me up. I left through the front doors and walked over to the sidewalk area outside the store. Right near the entrance, there were a few benches lined up, some small decorative trees, and a handful of plants scattered along the edge. That's where I always waited for my mom, if she wasn't already there. I sat down on one of the benches near one of the trees and pulled out my phone to pass the time. It was fairly quiet by then. The sky was starting to darken, and while there were still some people coming and going from the store, it definitely wasn't as busy as earlier. The parking lot was still filled with plenty of cars, though, a mix of employees' vehicles and customers' cars. While scrolling through my phone, I happened to glance up and noticed an older, large SUV pulling into the parking lot. It caught my attention for a moment because it looked pretty worn down compared to most of the other cars around. The vehicle slowly cruised past the front entrance of the store, not far from where I was sitting. I watched it as it passed by, turning down one of the aisles further along the lot. I didn't think much of it and went back to focusing on my phone. But maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, I noticed the same SUV again. It had circled back, almost like it was taking laps around the parking lot. This time, the car was moving noticeably slower. As it neared the front of the store, it turned down the aisle that led directly towards where I was sitting. The vehicle crept along the sidewalk in front of the store, slowing down even more as it approached me. Then it stopped. Completely. Right there, only a few feet in front of where I sat. I immediately felt this unsettling wave of discomfort wash over me. Something about this wasn't right. I knew for certain it wasn't my mom's car. A moment later, the passenger window rolled down, and I could see the driver now. It was a man, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark, shoulder-length hair partially hidden under a baseball cap. He leaned over and called out to me, asking if I needed a ride. He said he could take me home, or wherever I needed to go. I quickly shook my head and told him no, trying to sound firm without coming off rude. But instead of leaving, the man just sat there for a few seconds, staring at me with this unsettling, blank expression. Then he waved me over, insisting that I should come with him. I refused again, my nerves on edge, hoping he would just get the hint and drive off. But he didn't. Suddenly, the driver's door creaked open, and I watched as the man stepped out of the SUV. He shut the door behind him and began walking around the front of his vehicle. I didn't stick around to see what he wanted. I jumped up from the bench the second I saw him moving towards me. My heart was racing as I turned and bolted towards the store entrance. I didn't look back, but I could hear his footsteps following for a few moments. Luckily, I made it back inside within seconds. Safe under the store's fluorescent lights, I finally turned around to look. The man wasn't behind me. I glanced through the glass doors, but didn't see him standing outside either. It was like he'd vanished, but I had a sinking feeling he'd gone back to his vehicle. I stayed inside the store, sitting on one of the benches near the entrance, anxiously checking my phone. About 5 minutes later, my mom texted saying she was outside waiting in the car. I cautiously walked back out, my eyes scanning the parking lot until I spotted her vehicle. Relieved, I got inside, finally able to breathe again. I told her everything that had just happened, the creepy guy, the SUV, him following me, and we both looked around the lot together. That's when I saw it, the same old SUV, parked off to the side now, engine still running. The man never got out again, though. We pulled out of the lot and drove home, and thankfully he didn't follow us. Later that night, I called my manager to report the whole thing. I never found out if that guy came back to the store or if security did anything about it. But for the rest of the time I worked there, I never saw him again, and nothing like that happened to me after that. There's an old saying that goes, "The weirdos come out at night," and I've got to say that couldn't be more true, especially when it comes to places like that store. I can absolutely say from my own personal experiences that weird things really do happen at those late-night Walmart runs. For a while, I used to shop there pretty regularly, and a lot of those trips were at night. The Walmart closest to where I was living back then stayed open until midnight, which made it super convenient. At least, that's what I thought. One night, I decided to head over there a little after 11 p.m. I figured it would be nice to shop when it wasn't crowded. And sure enough, when I walked inside, the place was eerily quiet. There were only a handful of shoppers drifting around, and for a second, I was glad about that. No lines, no packed aisles. It felt like I practically had the place to myself. I grabbed a shopping cart and casually started making my way through the store, picking up what I needed, one thing at a time. Eventually, I found myself towards the back of the grocery section. There were these 3 narrow aisles back there, kind of tucked away from the main area. They always felt a little more secluded, almost forgotten compared to the rest of the store. As I stood there, scanning the shelves and debating over a few items, I suddenly got this strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I looked up, and sure enough, at the entrance of the aisle stood a man. I hadn't heard him walk up, and I had no idea where he came from. But there he was. And what made it so bizarre was his outfit. The guy was decked out in what I guess you could call a budget Darth Vader costume. It wasn't exactly high quality or official. It looked more like he threw together black clothes, a long cape, and topped it off with one of those plastic Darth Vader masks. At first, I actually chuckled to myself, thinking maybe this was some sort of prank or joke. I even told him, "Nice costume," trying to keep it light. But the man just stood there, silent. He didn't say a word, just stared at me through that dark mask. Then, without warning, he started walking toward me. It didn't feel funny anymore. He got way too close, right up in my personal space, practically face to face. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing through the cheap mask. That was enough for me. I grabbed my cart and pushed it down another aisle, putting distance between us. I figured that would be the end of it. Maybe he was trying to mess with other shoppers, and I just happened to be the first one he approached. But as I kept walking through the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. And sure enough, I saw him again. While moving between aisles, I spotted him off in the distance. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He was just standing there, facing directly toward me like some kind of silent statue. His masked face locked onto me. It sent a chill right down my spine. Trying to brush it off, I hurried to grab the last few items I needed. I just wanted to finish and get out of there. But the final aisle I had to go down. There he was again. This time, he was at the far end of the aisle, still in that ridiculous getup. But now, he was holding a lightsaber. One of those cheap plastic toy ones, probably grabbed from the toy section. Under different circumstances, it might have been funny. But considering how he'd been following me around the store, the whole situation was anything but amusing. I was torn between laughing nervously or being completely creeped out. But mostly I was wondering, why me? Why did he keep coming back to me? What was he trying to do? I did my best to ignore him, walked right past, and headed straight for the checkout lanes. Thankfully, he didn't follow me there. I paid for my things as quickly as I could, all the while keeping one eye on the store just in case. Feeling relieved, I finally walked out to my car. The parking lot outside was almost empty, which made it even more unsettling. I popped open the trunk and started loading my groceries into the back. That's when I spotted him again. The Darth Vader guy leaving the store, walking straight toward me. He was still a fair distance away, but it didn't matter. My heart was pounding. I rushed, tossing the rest of my groceries into the car without even organizing them. I shoved the cart into the return area and climbed into my car as quickly as I could. Just as I locked the doors, I saw him approach. He was standing no more than 10 feet away now, directly in front of my driver's side window. His masked face leaned in close, practically pressed against the glass, and those black, soulless eye lenses stared right at me. The cheap plastic lightsaber was still in his hand. Without saying a word, he knocked on the window. I ignored him, trying to keep calm as I started the engine. But the second I shifted the car into reverse, he lifted the toy lightsaber and started smacking my car with it. Hard. Way harder than I thought a plastic toy could handle. It wasn't playful. He was swinging that thing like he was trying to break something. I kept backing out, but he didn't stop. The hits kept coming, the plastic lightsaber bouncing off my car with unsettling force. It honestly felt like he was losing his mind. Finally, I threw the car into drive and sped off, leaving him standing there in the lot, still swinging the lightsaber around like a lunatic. When I got home, I was still in disbelief over the whole thing. Luckily, my car wasn't damaged. But even now, I can't decide if that night was more laughable or terrifying. One thing's for sure, the guy was definitely something else. I never found out who he was or why he singled me out like that. But after that experience, I haven't stepped foot in that Walmart since. It's been over 3 months now, and I sincerely hope I never see him again. I was just 17 years old back then, still in high school, and like most teens, eager to earn a little spending money and some independence. This particular incident happened roughly a month after I started working in a Walmart. My job was simple. I was a cashier, which meant I spent all my shifts standing at the front check lanes, ringing people up. Because I was still a minor, store policy didn't allow me to work past 10 p.m., but most of my evening shifts stretched right up until that time. I quickly learned that after around 7 p.m., things at the store would steadily quiet down, and by 9 o'clock, it was practically a ghost town. Back then, the store was actually open 24 hours, and I can't tell you how relieved I was that my shifts never went that late. One evening, I was scheduled for a typical shift from 4 p.m. until closing time for minors, 10 p.m. The first few hours went by like clockwork. There was the usual early evening rush, but eventually, the place quieted down as the night crept on. I had just finished helping a customer, and for the moment, there was no one else in my lane. That's when a man approached my register. He was thin, average height, nothing particularly noticeable about him, except for the fact that the only thing he was holding was a bottle of fruit juice, a Snapple. He raised it toward me and casually announced that he wanted to return it. He claimed he had purchased it, taken a sip, and it, quote, tasted like garbage. I politely explained that returns couldn't be processed at the register, and that he'd have to head over to the customer service desk, which wasn't far from where we were standing. But the man just stood there, clearly annoyed, insisting that I handle the return myself. He even told me how much he paid for it, as though that would change anything. I was positive he hadn't bought the drink from my lane because I didn't recognize him at all, and even if he had, returns weren't handled this way. Being a new employee, I wasn't about to break store policy over a bottle of juice. The man took another long sip of the Snapple. It was already about halfway empty by now. Then finally, with visible frustration, walked off toward customer service. I couldn't help but wonder if they'd even accept the return, considering the drink was already opened and partially gone. But before I could dwell on it, a new customer stepped into my lane, and I shifted my focus back to work. Over the next 10 minutes or so, a few more people came through my register, keeping me busy. Honestly, I had almost forgotten about the guy entirely, until he showed up again. There he was, standing in my lane, his expression sour. As he approached, he told me that customer service had refused to process his return. I offered a sympathetic but firm, sorry, but that didn't cut it for him. The man's frustration boiled over fast. His face twisted in anger, and he demanded that I give him his money back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I calmly explained again that I couldn't do that. It wasn't allowed, and besides, I didn't have cash on me. There was no way I could pull money from the register for a personal refund. That's when things took an ugly turn. The man cursed loudly, drawing the attention of the few shoppers nearby. Then, in one quick, aggressive motion, he lifted the Snapple bottle, which still had some liquid inside, and splashed it directly in my face. The cold, sticky drink hit my eyes, ran down my face, and soaked my hair. I stood there, stunned, my heart pounding. After dousing me, he slammed the empty bottle to the ground, cursed at me again, and stormed off toward the exit. For a moment, the area around me fell awkwardly silent. There weren't many people in that section of the store, but the few who were nearby looked just as shocked as I felt. Someone cautiously approached, asking if I was all right. I nodded, though I was mostly just embarrassed and shaken. My manager came over a minute later. After taking one look at me, he told me to go wash up and take a short break. While I cleaned my face off in the restroom, he asked for the full story. I told him everything I could remember, the Snapple, the man's attitude, and of course, the drink to the face. Once I was cleaned up, I headed to the break room to catch my breath. After my short break, I made my way back toward the check lanes, thinking the worst of the night was over. But as I approached the checkout area, my eyes landed on a scene I couldn't believe. At the far end, near the store's exit doors, several police officers were escorting the same man, the Snapple guy, out of the building. His face was red with anger, and even from a distance, I could hear him yelling something as they guided him outside. I hadn't even realized he was still in the store. I asked one of my co-workers what had happened. Apparently, after splashing me and storming off, the man had wandered into the electronics department and gotten into it with another employee. This time, it wasn't about the Snapple. He'd started shouting at them, making threats, and outright refusing to leave when asked. That's when someone called the police. They arrived quickly, but the man didn't exactly cooperate. It seemed pretty clear at that point that he was just looking for trouble. I also learned that he didn't have a receipt for the Snapple in the first place, which explained why customer service had refused the return. The whole thing was pointless from the start. To this day, that man is without a doubt the wildest, most unhinged customer I ever dealt with during my time working there. Honestly, part of me wanted to just hand him the $2 the Snapple probably cost, just to avoid the headache. But I didn't have any cash on me, and obviously, I couldn't take money from the till. Besides, considering he went and harassed another employee over a completely unrelated issue, I doubt that would have solved much of anything. I stayed at that job for a few more months before finally moving on to something else, and I never saw that guy again. A few years back, when I was around 18, I worked as a cashier at a Walmart not far from where I lived. It was only a part-time job, and I didn't stay there long, just about 3 months in total. But in that short time, I had one experience that stuck with me ever since. Most of my shifts were afternoon or evening hours, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours long. Being a teenage girl working her second job ever, I didn't mind it much. The work was simple: scan people's groceries, smile, make small talk when appropriate, and deal with the occasional rude or strange customer. It wasn't the worst job for someone my age. One particular shift started at 4 p.m. and was set to end at 9. The store was fairly busy when I clocked in, and I was quickly swept up into the routine of ringing up customer after customer. As the evening wore on, things gradually slowed down. By the time I was an hour into my shift, I had already served dozens of people, most of them pleasant and polite. But of course, every now and then there was the odd one, and that's when he showed up. It was hard to forget him. He wasn't particularly tall, just a bit taller than me, and I'm only about 5 feet 3 inches. He had short, dark hair, buzzed almost down to the scalp, and was wearing baggy shorts with an oversized t-shirt. I don't even remember what he bought, just a couple of small items. But it wasn't what he was purchasing that caught me off guard. When he came up to the register and stood face to face with me to pay, he casually asked, "What time do you get off work?" I didn't think much of it. It's not the first time a customer tried to make small talk. I simply answered, 9 o'clock, with a polite smile, figuring that was the end of the conversation. But instead of saying goodbye and leaving, the guy gave me this odd little smirk and replied, "See you then." It was such a strange response. He kind of chuckled to himself and walked away with his items. I wasn't sure if he was joking or just being weird, but I didn't dwell on it. I had work to do. The rest of the evening passed by without incident, and honestly, I completely forgot about the guy. Hours went by, customers came and went, and the store gradually emptied out as closing time approached. That was until I saw him again. It was nearing the end of my shift, and I was still standing at the same register. The store was quiet now, with only a handful of people lingering. As I was scanning items for another customer, I spotted him walking toward me. He approached from the same direction as the entrance, making it seem like he had just walked back into the store. As he got close, he looked at me with that same unsettling smirk and said, "Just 10 more minutes, right?" I glanced at the clock. It was exactly 8:50 p.m. I forced an awkward smile and replied, yeah, not really knowing what else to say. My stomach turned as I watched him casually walk off again, disappearing into one of the aisles. For a moment, I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe he was just being weird. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, something didn't feel right. When 9 o'clock finally rolled around, I was more than ready to clock out. I left my register, grabbed my things from the break room, and made my way toward the exit. My car was parked way out toward the back of the lot, since it had been packed earlier when I arrived. I barely made it 10 feet out of the store before a small red two-door car suddenly pulled up right in front of me, cutting me off. The window rolled down, and there he was, the same guy from earlier, sitting behind the wheel. He leaned over and, in the same casual tone, told me to hop in the passenger side. I shook my head firmly, saying I couldn't. I tried to walk around the car behind it, but the moment I moved, the guy threw his car in reverse, blocking my path. He told me again to get in, his voice growing more insistent now. I tried to play it cool, but my nerves were skyrocketing. I turned and quickly started walking away, my pace picking up. That's when I heard the car's engine rev as he started driving in the direction I was heading. Without hesitation, I broke into a full sprint. My heart was pounding as I ran across the parking lot toward my car. Fumbling with my keys, I managed to unlock the door, climb inside, and slam the lock button down just as he pulled into the space right next to mine. For a few terrifying seconds, I was frozen, trying to think what to do. He didn't get out of his car, but rolled his window down again and kept trying to talk to me, saying who knows what. I wasn't listening at that point. My only thought was getting help. I grabbed my phone and quickly texted one of my co-workers, someone I knew was still inside the store. Thankfully, they responded fast, telling the store manager what was happening. I sat in my car, trying to stay calm as the guy kept pestering me through the window. Within a minute or two, I saw my manager emerge from the store, walking straight toward the guy's vehicle. The manager approached, his face stern, and asked what the guy was doing. When the man didn't have a good answer, the manager threatened to call the police if he didn't leave immediately. Finally, the guy seemed to get the message. He threw his car in reverse, backed out of the space, and drove off without another word. I waited a few more minutes, making absolutely sure he was gone, and then drove home. My heart was still racing by the time I walked through my front door. After that night, I never saw the guy again. I only stayed at that job for about another month before moving on to something else. Looking back, I'm beyond grateful to my co-worker and my manager. I truly believe that guy would have followed me home if he hadn't stepped in. I still don't know exactly what his intentions were, but whatever it was nothing good.